This is El-Amin, and again, welcome to another podcast of issues and concerns. In this podcast, which I've entitled The Real Deal Behind the Meals Tax in Richmond, Virginia, I want to play for you the comments and remarks that I made yesterday evening, Tuesday, February 20th, 2018, at the Richmond Crusade for Voters Forum and Town Hall meeting on meals tax. I was one of 5 persons invited to speak on this issue. The others who spoke were 2 members of Richmond City Council, Parker Agelesto, who represents the 5th District, and Kimberly Gray, who represents the 2nd District. Also speaking was Scott Garnett, who represented the Richmond Restaurant Association, and Paul Goldman, who put together the referendum which was on the ballot in November 2017 that provided that no property tax would be used to fund a school improvement plan. The Crusade's announcement of this event stated, "The town hall focus will be on school modernization." Really? Where is the money? And where do we go from here? As you can hear from my remarks that are in this podcast, I was highly critical and downright indignant about the 35 years of disinvestment and redlining of Richmond public schools, primarily by the Richmond City Council. And when I say disinvestment and redlining, what I mean is that no significant funds for infrastructure improvement, that is, improvement of buildings, equipment, was done over 35 years, despite the fact that Richmond's inventory of schools are considered to be ancient, old, decrepit, many of them being over 60 years old and some being close to 100 years old. And so my argument and concern was, why was this? And why did the continuing increase in the facilities breakdown, blight, and deterioration allowed to continue even as I speak these words? And why were not property taxes ever put on the table as one of the funding sources to renovate and to rehabilitate and repair this crumbling and deteriorating infrastructure? I recognized before I made my remarks, and even after I made these remarks, that I was going to perhaps put into the thinking stream and the conversation something which is rarely, if ever, mentioned in dealing with this problem, and that the root of the problem is essentially racism, disrespect, and marginalization of people of African descent. And this is the fundamental reason for the wretched and unconscionable blight and deterioration of Richmond schools' infrastructure. Now, I'm not offering any apologies for doing this, as it needed to be said. However, the realist that I think I am, I recognize that if African American politicians, and particularly those who didn't say anything on the vote to agree to a paltry sum of $150 million to deal with an $800 million problem using only meals tax and not once mentioning property taxes, if they and other leading persons who have positions or titles in and around this city were to speak and articulate the truth that I spoke last night, this would elevate this problem and issue, giving it the highest priority and the funding necessary, including using property taxes to address this issue. Otherwise, if that doesn't happen, and it doesn't seem likely to happen, people like Richmond's mayor and the vast majority of council members and the vast majority of whites who own high-value real estate in the city will continue to ignore this problem, or, as the mayor did, throw pennies rather than dollars at this issue, and then try to justify their actions by suggesting that they have done something. Because the real truth of what is happening and why it is happening is what I mentioned at this meeting and will continue to occur as this problem is attempted to be swept under the rug. So, without further ado, the next that you will hear on this podcast are the remarks that I made at this forum. And I'm asking you, as thinking people, and hopefully as concerned people, let's get this truth out in the open. Let's make it part of the conversation. No, not part of it. Let's make it the conversation. And let's look at every available way to pull together the $800 million that needs to be used to revive, resuscitate, and to rehabilitate Richmond's crumbling infrastructure. Because the problem is not going to go away. All it is going to do is to get worse. And we're now facing the ultimate broken window theory. If you're not familiar with this theory, think about it in this way. If there is a broken window in your house and you fail to repair that window, then the elements like rain and snow and dampness and other atmospheric conditions will enter into the envelope of your house. And this broken window will now become walls that sag, ceilings that fall, and ultimately the entire structure will be compromised to a point where it can't be repaired. And it either will be torn down and replaced, or like so many structures in the inner city of Richmond, they will remain there as a blight and as a signal that black folk live here and the city and white folks really don't care, except if they're interested in gentrifying that neighborhood. Then they will swoop in, try to buy that house for pennies, put a lot of money into rehabilitating it, increase the value of that property and every other property in that neighborhood, and that gentrification will result in higher taxes for the people who have not done a single thing to improve their property, in order to allow the rich and the newly arrived people to enjoy their palace while our houses remain in a deplorable condition, and yet our taxes are going up. And that is a recipe for urban removal. That's the recipe that will allow block after block to be abandoned by the people who have lived there for 60 and 70 years, allowing the gentrification of that neighborhood so white people can move in and leave our people with no place to go and nothing to live in, because affordable housing are like hen's teeth. They are either rare or non-existent. So again, I hope you listen, and I hope you comment and spread the message that I was attempting to make at the Richmond Crusade for Forum.